Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you guys are enjoying the lunch. I haven't had mine yet because I'm here. How's it? Is it good? Good? Awesome. Okay, I'm looking forward to that. So, thank you for joining my session here today. We'll be covering a couple of topics here. First and foremost, it's more about what the attack surface that we're seeing in the Philippines is. And we will then look at what is security ratings and how you can use it as well. So, one of the things that we do at Security Scorecard is that we scan the internet, right? So we do it from a non-intrusive way. We don't need any installation of any agents. We look at what's publicly observable, and we do so by looking at all the 4.1 billion IP addresses on the internet, and that allows us to see the millions of malware transactions, the billions of malware transactions. We scan the dark web as well. We look at leaked credentials. We look at data. And across all that bot itself, it allows us to then see what's happening across the internet. So for us to do so, we have sensors across the world, including inside of China and Russia, that allows us to see the different flavors of the internet at the same time. And that allows us to capture a lot of data points. So the next few slides that I'm going to show you are from those data that we can collect and those data that we see across the entire landscape in the Philippines. So one of the interesting things that we see is when we scan the internet, when we look at the US, we see about 89 million IP addresses. These are IP addresses with issues, right? So all the results here are IP addresses with issues. In the US itself, you see 89 million IP addresses with issues. You can see correspondingly some of the threat actors associated with those IP addresses. I think everyone's interested in the last one, right? So you look at China, you look at Brazil because of the BRICS nations coming up as well. China, 79 million, Brazil, 22 million. But you can look at the threat actors, the top threat actors in the three countries. APT, 37. And if you look at Philippines, it's almost 2 million IP addresses with issues. Number two is also APT, 37. So let's drill down a little bit into these data sets as well. We look at Philippines. So this is all pure Philippines IP addresses. Top threat actors, PACRAT, APT27, APT28. One of the interesting ones is called Cobalt Group. So the Cobalt Group is an organization that targets financial organizations for the sake of earning money. So they're financially motivated. What they have done, and this is things that we have known, is that they attack the SWIFT systems, they attack ATMs, they have gangs worldwide, especially in the Europe, where they hit and run the ATMs with stolen credit cards and transfer the money out to any other accounts as well. If we look at it from a CVE perspective, you will notice all the CVEs that we're looking at is really, really old, right? CVEs from 2020, 2021, 2019 even, and all the way down to 2017. And these are commonplace, right? Remember, we are looking at about 2 million IP addresses, about 10%, 20% of that have CVEs, right? Which is really significant. So imagine a company, all the IP addresses that you have, 10% of your IP addresses have vulnerabilities that are publicly exposed, which means that the bad guys are seeing this too. So one of the things about public observation is the bad guys, the hackers, the attackers are seeing that same data too. So think of this as the hacker's view of the country, right? So if I'm a bad guy, I'm looking at the country, doing my reconnaissance, trying to understand what I want to attack, these are things that I can see. And if you notice at the open ports, one of the most interesting ones is port 80. Port 80 and 443 is part of your HTTP and HTTPS connections. So that's your application security, the way that you load your web application. But today, especially in the room, and if you've been in cyber for a long time, we say HTTPS everywhere, right? Don't use HTTP, use HTTPS or redirect. But if you look at the corresponding numbers itself, it doesn't tally, right? The port 80 and port 443 doesn't tally. What's also interesting is port 22, which is SSH, known by ransomware groups to exfiltrate data. And also, there's also one more there, 7547, which is known for Mirai ransomware, where they attack your modems, your routers, use it to spread malware. So port 7, so the top 4 ports, you can already see a very interesting trend there. So this is by the type of attacks. So if we look at it from a risk perspective, the IP addresses having vulnerabilities and associated threat actors to them, it gets interesting because threat actors are targeting vulnerabilities to get a wide footprint and to get into systems as well. We look at IP addresses with ransomware, right? So we have about 6,000 records there, and that allows organizations to be able to see what's happening as well. Remember, these are all data collected from a public perspective, right? Public observations of IP addresses with ransomware events, having infections caused by what threat actors, and having what type of malicious reputation. So especially the last one, having malicious reputation, if we look at the IP addresses with these ports itself, these are all exfiltration ports, right? Port 22, port 831, 179 is BGP, right? BGP is a very interesting port to have open to exfiltrate data. That's how the bad guys stay under the radar, right? Because we typically don't look at this part of the network. We look at port 22, typically what we do is that we expose this publicly, right? We are happy with this to be open, but that's how the bad guys are stealing data too, right? So in the event of ransomware, in the event of data exfiltration, these are the ports in which the bad guys are taking the data out, right? So a lot of times we don't track it because we allow for this data to process as part of our business operations, which is not a great behavior. So here's a little bit more specific. Looking at exposed databases in the Philippines, we see about 6,700 counts of it. And specifically for a MySQL instance, we see about 4,000 counts of it. Right? Remember, we're looking at about 2 million, so this is not as big, but imagine this is all single organizations. That's a lot of organizations with exposed databases publicly, right? First and foremost is why would you have a publicly exposed database? That's not a great way to do security. Second thing, looking at file transfer, having ports SSH, FTP, and Telnet publicly exposed. Again, we see a significant bump there, 63,000 of ports that are open, IP addresses with those ports open. Specifically looking at FTP, we see about 16,000 over IP addresses in that way. Again, these are how the bad guys are exfiltrating data. They're stealing the data, pulling them out, and doing a ransomware against organizations. Last but not least, when we look at malware, we look at threat actors, their tactics, techniques, and procedure. We look at organizations' IP addresses with associated APTs, with associated TTPs observed publicly. That number also goes pretty significant, right? We see about 32,000 IP addresses with threat actors targeting those organizations. And interestingly, we see about 20,000 related to the covert group. So again, the covert group is financially motivated and specifically targets the banks, the financial institutions. So what matters here is those are all just data, right? How do you use it? One of the key things that we notice is that in security, there's really no single metric in deciding and reporting what the security health is, right? How do you build a KPI around security? Today, we look at what? Your pen test reports, your audit reports, the number of findings, did we get breached or not? It's not really qualitative, right? And especially when you look at across the board, how do I understand my risk? How do I communicate my risk to my management and to my board? And one more part here, when we talk about attack surface, how do I know my third parties are doing the same as well? I can be secure, I can be protected, but I will still get breached if my third parties that have my data gets breached. How do I know what risk am I taking on if my third parties are not doing the same? How do I measure them as well, right? What KPIs do I use? And that's where the challenge comes down to what we build, right? That data set that we saw earlier, that statistics that we saw earlier, comes down to ability to be able to gather that data and be able to then look at it from an intelligence perspective, normalize that data and score it. So if we can score or give a security scorecard on every organization, whether they're A, whether they're B, or whether they're F, you know instantly how are they performing from a cybersecurity perspective. And this is what we're doing. We measure organizations. We have about 12 million organizations across in our platform. We continuously build on that. We look at it from a different perspective, but the A to F don't just represent how an organization is performing in terms of the security posture, but also the security maturity. So if we look back at the ports that we mentioned earlier, right? So having ports like Telnet, like FTP, these are really bad ports to open publicly. If you have those ports open, doesn't it mean that a company is not as mature as you think, even though they may pass audits as well? So that's what this also represents. But more importantly, the grades, A to F, represents the likelihood of breach. Right? If a company is F, they are 7.7 times more likely to be breached. And we're so confident in this, we have a 99% accuracy on that, and we are able to guarantee this as well, right? So we have a guarantee behind this. With that, I thank you, and if you'd like to have a chat, I'll be at this table 6 as well. Thank you very much.